So with this new music video for Choker, we've been given a lot of small little details to dive into and pick apart. But I'm not really going to be doing that today. I'm not really a big zoom in and enhance Easter egg hunt kind of guy. Don't get me wrong though, I will talk about it. It's just that I prefer to look at the bigger picture. And what bigger picture do we have than the front cover of the album? When I first saw this thing, what immediately jumped out to me were those eyes. Those glowing yellow eyes. On the surface level, it's just a creepy, unsettling looking dragon. But there are some hidden details here. The word destroy is hidden within the scales, along with a pattern that aligns with a street named Clancy Way. Destroy Clancy, as if that's the true intention behind those eyes. But these eyes have a very, very long history attached to them, and one that you wouldn't quite expect. What you're seeing right now is the work of Walter Crane. Now, remember that name. Walter Crane was an illustrator known for his work in visually adapting poems, fairy tales, and nursery rhymes during the late 1800s. Now, Walter Crane had a large body of work, but one poem he illustrated in particular was Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene. It tells the stories of several knights who represent a particular virtue on their quests for the Faerie Queene. One of these knights, Redcross, represents the virtue of holiness and must defeat both theological error and the dragon of deception to free the parents of Una, who represents truth. Okay, you may be wondering, James, why in the world are you telling me all about this? Well, take a look at this. This is Walter Crane's depiction of the Dragon of Deception. Notice those familiar, piercing eyes? The very same eyes that belong to the dragon that appears on the cover of the album. The idea that this album is propaganda, that we're being lied to in some sort of way, isn't a mystery to any of us. But the fact the very cover of the album features a deceiving dragon just adds a little bit of extra spice here. Una, the character who represents truth in the Faerie Queene, is very similar in the same way to how Clancy is the character who reveals truth. And if Clancy is dead, therefore truth is dead, and so lies and deception can take their full form. Redcross represents holiness. I'm gonna venture a guess that whatever role Tyler plays in the story, or whoever our main protagonist may be, is meant to be this holy character. But if we say, for instance, that Redcross is in fact Tyler, then I believe Nico or Blurryface to be inspired by a character literally named Despair. Despair is a character who appears in the story and, using pure rhetoric, nearly persuades Redcross, or in this case, Tyler, to end his own life. Okay, let's rewind for a second here and talk about Walter Crane. I told you to remember that name. Because from what I've discovered, I believe Walter Crane's entire history of work bleeds into the very fabric of this entire album's story. This connection first begins with Crane's artwork inspired by the nursery rhyme Around the Mulberry Bush, a title of which some keen-eyed fans might notice has inspired a yet unreleased song that appears on the album itself, Mulberry Street. A coincidence? Maybe. But no, I don't think anything is a coincidence with these guys. Furthermore, Crane has been a great influence on some of the design language seen in the album. See, Walter Crane's particular art style is what's known as Art Nouveau, an art style that's famously used in old fairy tales, using curves, a connection to nature. It explores the female figure with vine-like borders and flowers sprouting amongst the design, and arcing fonts with twisting and curling ascenders and serifs. These techniques are actually somewhat used in the design for the album artwork. The bordering, the curves, the fonts, it's all there. Granted, in a very modern retro style, especially in the colour scheme, but it's there. The connection to Walter Crane is stronger than at face value. Almost as though the ideologies of Crane will play a huge role in the album itself, much like we saw with the Nicholas Bourbaki in Trench. The Nicholas Bourbaki are a group of mathematicians that practice the concept of topology, believing one can mold objects into whatever shape they please, but it will always be defined as that object's original state. Almost like how the bishops use vialism to mold and reshape the minds of the people of Dima to conform to their standards. In fact, in the new music video for Choker, we find a callback to the idea of vialism. In the video, living, breathing organisms are reformed and reshaped into objects, in this case toys, commodities to be sold. And Josh represents being under control, lacking free will. And even the Fairy Queen speaks of the idea of following a false religion, the way vialism appears to be presented as a false religion in Dima. These ideologies ran through so much of Trench, and I can't begin to deny that Walter Crane will be any different for Scaled and Icy. So, what are Walter Crane's ideologies? Well, this is where things start to get a little more interesting, because Walter Crane wasn't just any old fantasy and nursery rhyme illustrator. No, he was more than that, and his body of work shows this. Because Walter Crane was, and always will be, a propaganda artist. Previously, we discussed the album's design language and connected that to being a critique of capitalist values, and here, we find Crane is a propaganda artist for socialist ideologies, a movement in which pushes against the ideals of capitalism. That small, minute connection to the mulberry bush can be related to the idea of moving around in a monotonous cycle, and the imagery of a dragon can be related to that cycle as well. Myths like the Oribus, which is a serpent or dragon-like creature that bites its own tail. It represents the cycle of life, which visually looks familiar to that of Jormungandr, the world serpent, which wraps itself tightly around the world, much like how capitalism has a grip around our world, how dragons, especially in Tolkien's The Hobbit, hoard gold in ways that corporations and billionaires hoard all of our cash. I've mentioned all of this before, but it truly begs reiterating, because it's not just an afterthought to me now, because it actually connects to the ideologies of Walter Crane. And the symbol of the dragon backs up these ideologies in metaphorical ways in many different mythologies. Even in the Fairy Queen, we are being deceived by the ruling class in the same way that we are being deceived by the dragon. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think that this album is going to be outright and blatantly anti-capitalist. It's all subtext, it's all there under a layer of everything else. Because I don't think Tyler is going to start screaming "eat the rich" into the microphone on stage or anything like that, because Tyler do be looking hella tasty. But I think in the way that big companies and businesses and the 1%ers control our world is a reflection of how Dima controls the world that 21 Pilots have created. A representation of the mind, a story about jurisdiction of our subconscious. What has power? over our mind, our demons, our insecurities that threaten to corrupt us into a cycle of formality, or our consciousness. That is what can break the cycle in half and reveal to us the truth that our dragons of deception hide from all of us.